Welcome to This Day in His Story, created by American Heritage Worldwide. A reminder that every day holds something new to learn. Did you know that April Fool's Day began in the 16th century in France when New Year's Day was moved from April 1st to January 1st? Learn that people who continued to celebrate New Year's Day on April 1st were called April Fools. Discover that April Fool's Day is celebrated all over the world, and that in Scotland, April Fool's Day lasts for 2 whole days. Join in the fun and play some jokes on unsuspecting family members and friends. When someone discovers the joke, don't forget to yell, "April Fools!"
Imagine waking up and opening the newspaper to read that Taco Bell has just purchased the Liberty Bell.
Oh, wow. Just bought a national monument.
Yeah, literally bought it. Not only that, but they're relocating it and renaming it the Taco Liberty Bell to help pay off the national debt.
That is amazing.
Right. You would probably laugh and just turn the page. But in 1996, thousands of people didn't laugh. They actually panicked.
I mean, I can see how that would cause a stir.
Oh, it was chaos. They jammed the phone lines at the National Park Service in absolute outrage. And it was all because of a date on the calendar.
Right, April 1st. It truly is a remarkable phenomenon when you think about it.
It really is.
We spend, 364 days of the year trying to establish trust, teaching our kids to be honest, expecting the media to give us facts. And then for one socially sanctioned 24-hour window,
We just throw it all out.
exactly, we essentially declare a truce with the truth.
Well, welcome to the deep dive. Because today, for you listening, we are jumping into a massive stack of research, historical documents, and cultural studies dedicated to the genesis and genius of April Fool's Day.
And it is a fascinating stack of research.
It is. And, okay, let's unpack this. Because for the longest time, I just assumed April 1st was like a manufactured holiday. Something invented by a gag company to sell whoopee cushions.
Right, a Hallmark holiday.
Yeah. But the sources we're looking at today paint a much, much stranger picture.
Far stranger. I mean, the impulse to playfully deceive each other isn't some modern internet trend. It's deeply woven into human history.
Yeah, that really surprised me.
Understanding its roots actually reveals quite a bit about how our brains process reality. To find the beginning, we really have to look at the intersection of astronomy, sociology, and a rather stubborn resistance to change.
Which takes us to 16th century France. This is where the leading historical theory for April Fool's Day originates. And it's all about calendars.
Right. So in 1582, France transitioned from the Julian calendar to the new Gregorian calendar. This was dictated by the Council of Trent.
Okay.
Before this shift, the new year didn't actually start on January 1st. It was celebrated with a week-long festival that ended on April 1st, which roughly coincided with the spring equinox.
But, information didn't exactly travel at the speed of fiber optics in the 1500s.
Definitely not.
So the decree goes out that New Year's Day is now January 1st. But between the communication lag and the fact that humans just, generally hate changing their habits, a lot of people just ignored the new rule.
Yeah, they just kept ringing in the new year in the spring.
And society rarely treats nonconformity with kindness, right? Those who celebrated the new year in April became the targets of localized mockery.
They were labeled April Fools.
Exactly. People would literally place paper fish on their backs and play elaborate tricks on them to shame them into adopting the new chronological standard.
Which is such an interesting way to enforce compliance.
I try to picture that happening today. Like, imagine if the government decided to permanently move the weekend to Tuesday and Wednesday.
Oh, people would riot.
Right. They say Saturday and Sunday are now work days. You know for a fact you'd have that one neighbor who refuses to accept it.
Oh,
They
absolutely.
keep firing up the lawnmower and throwing loud barbecue parties on Saturday afternoon, insisting it's still the weekend. You would absolutely make fun of them.
Without a doubt. It's a mechanism for enforcing societal norms through humor rather than, violence or the law.
Yeah, it makes sense.
But we can actually trace this springtime urge for mild chaos much further back than the French Renaissance. The Romans had a festival called Hilaria
Which sounds exactly like the word hilarious.
because it shares the exact same root. Hilaria was a festival of rejoicing, celebrating the resurrection of the god Attis, and it took place right on the vernal equinox, specifically March 25th.
Okay, so late March.
Right. And if we look at the Roman calendar, March 25th was officially known as the 8th of the calends of April, the calends being the first day of the month.
So you have this ancient, culturally embedded festival of joy, masquerades, and mild social inversion, directly tethered to the approach of April.
Exactly.
It makes a lot of sense, neurologically speaking. I mean, coming out of a long, dark, restrictive winter, people get spring fever, the weather warms up, and humanity just seems to need a collective pressure release valve.
That psychological release valve is really well documented. In fact, the first time we see a direct literary connection between April 1st specifically and the concept of foolishness is all the way back in 1392.
Wow, that long ago.
Yeah, in Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales, a vain rooster is tricked by a sly fox, and Chaucer dates the event to 32 days after March began, meaning April 1st.
So this urge has been marinating in our collective consciousness for centuries.
Yeah.
But here's where we hit, like, one of the most brilliant parts of the source material.
The King Kugel story.
Yes. I was reading through the historical anecdotes, and I found this incredible story about the Roman Emperor Constantine. Supposedly, a group of jesters approached Constantine and boasted that they could run the Roman Empire much better than he could.
Which is a bold claim to make to an absolute monarch.
Very bold. But Constantine is apparently amused. He decides to call their bluff and actually lets one of them be king for a day.
Just hands over the empire.
Basically. He appoints a jester named King Kugel, who immediately issues a royal decree demanding a day of absolute absurdity and pranks. It's this perfect, neat little origin story.
It is entirely too perfect.
Because it is 100% fabricated.
It's completely made up.
Yeah. This history was invented out of thin air in 1983. A Boston University history professor named Joseph Boskin was giving an interview to an Associated Press reporter named Fred Bales.
And Bales was trying to write a human interest piece on the origins of April Fool's Day, right?
Exactly. Boskin honestly told the reporter he didn't know the exact origin. But Bales wouldn't accept that. He kept pressing, saying things like, "Oh, don't be so modest, you're a historian, you must know."
Which is a very dangerous thing to say to an academic who specializes in American humor.
It really is. Boskin realizes this reporter is just desperate for a printable narrative. So he thinks, you want a story, I'll give you a story.
And he just makes it up on the spot.
He completely invents the Emperor Constantine narrative right there. He literally names the fake jester king after a popular big noodle dish, Kugel.
That's hilarious.
And the Associated Press ran the story nationwide. It took weeks for them to realize they'd been had and issue a retraction.
What's fascinating here is the psychological dynamic between the journalist and the professor. The reporter's desire for a compelling narrative completely overrode his critical thinking skills.
He just wanted it to be true so badly.
Yeah, exactly. He ignored the absurdity of a Roman emperor naming someone after an Ashkenazi Jewish casserole. It proves the central thesis of our sources today, which is that you cannot blindly trust everything you read.
Because human beings are wired to accept information that fits the shape of the story they want to hear.
Precisely.
The source material practically winks at us here. It says, today's lesson will teach you not to trust everything you read or hear. Don't worry, though. You can trust me.
Which is the most suspicious thing anyone can possibly say on April 1st.
Right. It sets a necessary tone of skepticism. And that skepticism is required because as this tradition spread from Europe across the globe, it didn't just remain a simple trick with a paper fish.
No, it mutated into deeply ingrained cultural rituals.
Let's talk about those mutations because some of them are just baffling. Like in France, Italy, Belgium, and Switzerland, they don't call it April Fool's Day. They call it April Fish, Poisson d'avril.
Which goes back to the paper fish we mentioned earlier.
Right, but wait. Of all the animals in the kingdom to represent getting tricked, why a fish? Why not a sheep or a pigeon, or something we actually associate with being gullible?
Well, it comes down to the mechanics of fishing. Think about what a young, inexperienced fish does when it sees something shiny in the water.
It just goes for it.
Exactly. It doesn't pause to analyze the nutritional value or the structural integrity of the object. It just acts on instinct and takes the bait.
Well, that makes so much sense.
Right. When you construct a prank, you are essentially dangling a shiny, artificial lure in front of a friend's cognitive biases. You are hoping they snap at it before their higher reasoning kicks in.
Wow.
Once they swallow the lie, they are the fish.
They took the bait. That is
Yeah.
a brilliant metaphor. It really changes how you look at a prank.
It does.
Now, contrast that with how they handle the day in the UK and Canada. Over there, they have a very strict time limit. You are only allowed to play pranks in the morning.
Just the morning.
Yet the moment the clock strikes noon, the foolishness is completely over. If you play a prank in the afternoon, you are considered the fool.
That boundary is crucial for social cohesion.
It represents a societal agreement that we need an outlet for mischief, but we also require a return to functional reality.
We can't just be paranoid all day.
Exactly. A society cannot operate indefinitely in a state of epistemological chaos. We need to trust our environment to get through the day.
I completely respect that boundary, especially when you look at Scotland. According to the research, in Scotland, April Fools lasts for 2 entire days.
48 hours.
48 hours of chaos. Day 1 is called Hunt the Gowk, a gowk being a cuckoo bird or a fool, and people are sent on entirely pointless errands.
Like a wild goose chase.
Yeah. And Day 2 is Taily Day, which is actually where the modern kick me sign comes from. It involves pinning fake tails or signs on people's backs.
That sounds exhausting.
Honestly, I get stressed just thinking about it.
Yeah.
How do you survive a 48-hour prank marathon? You would be in a constant state of hypervigilance. You couldn't trust your coffee, your chair, your own family.
It would certainly test the limits of interpersonal trust and your nervous system.
Seriously.
But notice that whether it's a morning limit in London or a 2-day marathon in Edinburgh, these are mostly interpersonal deceptions. Friends tricking friends.
Right. Personal pranks.
The dynamic shifts dramatically when we look at what happens when massive, culturally trusted institutions decide to get in on the fun.
Oh, this is my absolute favorite part of the research. We have a masterclass here in media hoaxes. Let's rewind to 1950.
Okay.
The BBC, like the British Broadcasting Corporation, the absolute pinnacle of serious stiff upper lip journalism, runs a documentary segment on their program Panorama about the Swiss spaghetti harvest.
The spaghetti harvest.
Yes, and this wasn't just a quick mention. They had actual high-quality footage of peasant women carefully plucking long strands of spaghetti down from the branches of trees and laying them in the sun to dry.
And we have to remember the context of 1950s Britain here. This is a post-war society still dealing with the echoes of rationing.
Right. Food was serious business.
Spaghetti was not an everyday pantry staple back then. It was an exotic, somewhat mysterious foreign delicacy that usually came in a tin smothered in tomato sauce.
So when the esteemed broadcaster Richard Dimbleby, with his incredibly authoritative voice, explains that the spaghetti crop was particularly abundant that year due to the disappearance of the spaghetti weevil.
The spaghetti weevil.
Yeah, people bought it hook, line, and sinker. The BBC received hundreds of phone calls from viewers earnestly asking how they could cultivate their own spaghetti trees in their back gardens.
Which really demonstrates how authority acts as a bypass valve for critical thinking.
What do you mean by bypass valve?
Well, when information comes from a source we have pre-vetted as serious, like the BBC, our brain lowers its defensive filters to save energy.
We just assume they did the fact-checking for us.
Exactly. We saw the exact same thing with the Taco Liberty Bell in 1996. Taco Bell didn't just put out a press release. They bought full-page advertisements in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and USA Today.
And if it's printed in the Times, your brain assumes a rigorous editorial process has already verified the information.
Yes, and the White House press secretary at the time, Mike McCurry, even leaned into the chaos.
Oh, read about this.
When reporters asked him about the bell, he kept a completely straight face and announced that the Lincoln Memorial had also been sold to Ford Motor Company and was being rebranded as the Ford Lincoln Mercury Memorial.
That is brilliant. It was just a cascading illusion.
It was. But there is another psychological mechanism at play in these hoaxes, beyond just the authority of the medium.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because if we were talking about the mechanics of a hoax, we have to talk about Sid Finch.
Oh, Sid Finch, a classic.
In 1985, Sports Illustrated published a 14-page feature article written by the legendary journalist George Plimpton. It detailed the emergence of a New York Mets pitching prospect named Sid Finch.
Right.
And Sid Finch was an absolute anomaly. He was a skinny, reclusive orphan who had supposedly learned the art of the pitch in a Tibetan monastery.
Oh.
And he could throw a baseball 168 miles per hour.
Which, from a biomechanical standpoint, that velocity would shatter the bones and tear the ligaments in a human arm. The fastest recorded pitch is hovering around like 105 miles per hour.
So it is entirely physically impossible.
Right.
But Plimpton didn't stop there. He claimed Finch carried a French horn with him everywhere he went. And when he pitched, he didn't wear baseball cleats. He wore exactly one heavy hiking boot on his right foot and left his other foot completely bare.
This raises a really important question. Why did millions of sports fans believe a man was throwing 168 miles an hour while wearing a single hiking boot?
I would normally say it's just because Sports Illustrated printed it, but that doesn't explain the hiking boot part.
The boot is actually the key to the entire illusion.
Really? How so?
Psychologists refer to this as the specificity heuristic. Our brains are naturally skeptical of vague claims. But when a narrative is packed with intensely granular, bizarre, and specific details like a French horn and one barefoot, our cognitive processing essentially short circuits.
Like, it's too weird to be fake.
Exactly. The brain calculates that no rational person would invent details so absurdly specific unless they were simply reporting the messy, chaotic truth of reality.
So the hiking boot is the equivalent of naming the fake king Kugel. The detail itself is the Trojan horse that sells the lie.
Precisely. It provides the illusion of authenticity through excessive, disorienting detail.
Wow. So we've looked at how massive institutions hijack our brains, but it's almost more fascinating how easily we can replicate these same psychological blind spots in our own homes with barely any budget.
Oh, the practical prank.
Yeah, the source provides a playbook of household pranks for you to try today. And to be clear, these are harmless. Always clean up after your fun, and never do anything that genuinely causes distress.
Of course.
But let's look at the mechanics of why these work. First idea?
Yeah.
Swap out your framed family photos for pictures of famous people. Just slide a picture of Nicolas Cage over your brother's face in a vacation photo and wait.
That prank preys on pattern recognition. We stop actively looking at familiar environments. We just scan for the established pattern.
So they might not even notice.
Right. It might take someone days to realize their environment has been altered.
How about this one? Grab someone's phone and change the keyboard shortcuts. Make it so that whenever they type good morning, the phone autocorrects it to Mary. Can I get fries with that?
That is a brilliant disruption of muscle memory. We rely heavily on technological autopilot. When that autopilot suddenly produces a nonsensical result, it creates a momentary cognitive dissonance that is incredibly amusing to witness.
It really is.
Yeah.
Or for parents with heavy sleeping kids,
Yeah.
carefully carry them to a different bed in a completely different room in the middle of the night.
Just completely change their surroundings.
Yeah, when they wake up, they experience immediate spatial disorientation. Or the classic. Pour a bowl of cereal and milk and leave it in the freezer overnight. In the morning you hand it to them, they go to plunge their spoon in, and they hit a brick wall.
That is a simple subversion of physics. They expect a liquid state. They encounter a solid state. The brain has to rapidly recalculate its understanding of the physical world.
It's so simple, but so effective. If someone in your house is commuting, you can tape a sign to their bumper that says, "My kids are playing an April Fool's joke on me. Honk and wave at me."
Oh, no.
They will spend a 30-minute drive completely bewildered as to why they are suddenly beloved by the entire neighborhood.
That's pretty good.
And finally, my favorite. Take a pillowcase, remove the pillow, and fill it with partially inflated balloons. When they drop their head onto the bed tonight, the pop provides the final jump scare of the day. And if you need more ideas, the source also recommends a video titled "Cake Pranks for Kids."
These are excellent tactile examples of playing with reality. But if we connect this to the bigger picture,
Yeah, let's look at the bigger picture.
the underlying theme of everything we've discussed today actually takes on a much heavier significance.
It does. Because when you realize how easily our brains are tricked by a fake spaghetti harvest, or a specific detail like a hiking boot, or even just a bowl of frozen milk, it really begs a much larger question.
Right.
If our daily perception of reality is this vulnerable to manipulation, how do we make sure our major life choices aren't built on similar illusions?
That is the exact pivot the source material makes. It points out that while playing a joke with a frozen bowl of cereal is a fun, temporary disruption, we face a serious danger when we carry that vulnerability into our actual lives. Well, we are constantly surrounded by cultural pranks, so to speak, shifting illusions that tell us what should make us happy, what is valuable, and what is true.
Yeah, society is constantly trying to sell us something.
Exactly. To navigate that, the source insists we must look to the Lord for guidance rather than the shifting trends of the world.
And the source grounds this in a very direct warning from the scriptures, Matthew chapter 7, verse 26.
Right.
It says, "And every one that heareth these sayings of mine, and doeth them not, shall be likened unto a foolish man, which built his house upon the sand."
Building on the sand.
Yeah, so the text compares ignoring eternal counsel to building a house on sand. I get the basic idea of the metaphor, but why sand specifically? What is it about sand that makes it the ultimate symbol of foolishness?
Think about the physics and the geological makeup of sand. It is composed of tiny, disconnected particles of silica and rock.
Okay, there's no solid structure.
Right. There is no interlocking structure. It possesses no inherent stability. On a calm, sunny day, a foundation of sand might look perfectly flat and reliable. The house looks beautiful.
But then the weather changes.
Yes, sand is hyper-responsive to its environment. The moment pressure is applied, like a shift in the wind, a rising tide, a heavy storm, those disconnected particles simply slide past one another. The ground gives way and the structure violently collapses.
Wow. It makes me think about how people build their entire identities today. You see someone build a career or a self-image entirely on a viral internet trend or the approval of strangers on social media.
Which is incredibly fragile.
That is the definition of a sand foundation. It looks incredibly successful for a brief moment, but the second the cultural wind changes direction or the algorithm updates, everything they've built completely collapses because there was no permanent structure holding it together.
That is a perfect modern equivalent. Ignoring the counsel of the Lord means choosing to anchor your life, your morality, and your family to things that are structurally guaranteed to shift.
Things like popularity or wealth.
Exactly. Popular opinion, fleeting wealth, societal status. These are the sandy foundations the world offers us. They are illusions. And building a life on an illusion is the ultimate form of foolishness.
It really is.
A prank is a temporary disorientation, but building your life on sand is a permanent disaster.
Which brings up the obvious alternative. If sand is the illusion, what is the reality?
The rock, the unchanging, eternal principles provided by the Lord.
Building on the rock.
Yes. The critical difference is that when you build on rock, it doesn't mean the storms won't hit. The wind still blows, the water still rises, and the pressures of life still apply.
The storms still come.
But the foundation does not yield. Your life remains structurally sound because it is anchored to truth rather than the temporary shifting narratives of the day.
That is so powerful. So what does this all mean for us today on April 1st? It means we've covered a staggering amount of ground.
We really have.
We've traced the urge to prank back to Roman equinox festivals and 16th century calendar holdouts. We've exposed the fake history of King Kugel, marveled at the BBC's spaghetti trees, and broken down the psychology of Sid Finch's hiking boot.
And we've arrived at a profoundly grounding reality check about the architecture of our own lives.
It is a brilliant study in contrasts. We can deeply appreciate the joyful, harmless deception of a holiday, while simultaneously recognizing the absolute necessity of unchanging truth when it comes to the foundation of our lives.
It's all about knowing the difference between the two.
Exactly. So, to you listening, if you are stepping into the chaos today, remember to keep your jokes lighthearted. Keep them harmless. Please clean up your frozen cereal bowls so your family doesn't have to.
Yes, clean up your messes.
And most importantly, when you pull off the perfect illusion, don't forget to yell, April Fools.
But as the day ends and you return to normal life, I want to leave you with a different sort of question to mull over.
Okay, let's hear it.
We've spent centuries refining the art of the prank, utilizing authority and specificity to trick the human brain. But now we are entering an era of deepfakes and AI-generated reality, where incredibly convincing audio and video can be fabricated in seconds.
Oh, that's true.
When everyday life can seamlessly mimic an April Fool's hoax, will a dedicated day of deception eventually become obsolete? Or will April 1st become the only day of the year we actually remember to question what we see?
A slightly terrifying but necessary question to keep us awake. Stay curious, build on the rock, and watch out for the April fish.
Thank you for joining us for this day in His story. May the lessons of yesterday inspire you to see God's hand today and to play your part in His story now. For more faith-based learning, visit ahsworldwide.org, the homeschool for faith and family.